Hi students, welcome to this online lesson which is on chapter 3, the movement of substances. Now in this particular video, right, I'll only be touching on two main things, which are the processes of diffusion as well as that of osmosis. Okay, so without further ado, let's move on. Now, what I need you all to understand is that by the end of this entire session, you should be able to define diffusion and also to discuss what are some of the importance of diffusion in terms of the nutrient uptake or gaseous exchange in plants and animals. Pretty sure that all of us here will have definitely seen this or in fact used this before in our life. Now this is an air wick or just any form of air purifier. You know that if I were to spray this out now in any part of the room, eventually every spot in the room will smell like this particular air purifier. Now what you are actually experiencing in terms of your sense of smell is actually the process called diffusion. Now, even if you haven't used that before, I'm pretty sure you have definitely smelled a fart before, I guess. Right? So, imagine you were in a lift okay, with some strangers and someone would let off this silent but deadly fart. Okay? Now, the problem is that although the fart originates from the person, the smell will eventually surround you in the entire elevator. Now, what exactly is happening over here is the process of diffusion. Now, so what exactly is diffusion? To understand diffusion, we can actually try to understand how particles might move in a situation like this. Particles are always possessing energy. I think it's something that you have learned in chemistry before. So particles are, especially gas particles, they are free moving, random motion. Even your solid particles, they're actually vibrating in a fixed position. So particles are never stationary by themselves. If you look at this diagram over here, you realize that there's a lot of these blue color circles and very little blue color circles over here. Now what we call this in biology is actually termed as a region of higher concentration on the left side. On the right side, we have what we call a region of lower concentration. Now just by looking at the diagram, I believe that you'll be able to tell that particles actually can move from one direction towards the other one. So what exactly is happening? If you look at this animation by itself, you notice that particles are actually moving and spreading out. And what is interesting about this is that initially, all the particles are clustered within that area whereby they are in high concentration. They then start to move around randomly, eventually occupying the spaces in regions that originally had a low concentration of these red particles. What you're witnessing now is diffusion, whereby particles move from a region of higher concentration towards the region of lower concentration such that they eventually spaced out until you get an even spread of the particles. Before, this is what we call the region of higher concentration, and this, as well as the other spaces around, are what we call the region of lower concentration. Now what this means is that particles were actually able to eventually spread themselves out towards any of the region of low concentration, eventually achieving this equal distribution as you see on the right, whereby there is more or less about the same number of particles at any region within the space being provided. Now that itself is diffusion. To understand it better, we need to understand this term called the concentration gradient. Gradient is something that you have learned in math. It actually tells you an extent of steepness, right? Whether the graph is steep or if it's gentle. So likewise over here, why is there a gradient? There is a gradient because in diffusion, we're actually looking at two different regions of concentration. So on point A, there's actually a higher concentration, whereas at point B, there's a lower concentration. So what we are seeing here is that this difference is actually what we term as a concentration gradient. Because of that, particles can actually move from point A towards point B. You notice that this is moving down the concentration gradient from a higher point to a lower point. The concentration gradient term actually refers to the difference in concentration between the two regions. How is that related to diffusion? Now, particles always possess kinetic energy, and whenever possible, they will diffuse down the concentration gradient. This means that diffusion is actually referring to the net movement of particles from a region where they are of higher concentration to a region where they are of lower concentration. The term net actually refers to overall. So we're actually looking at how the particles move overall instead of just looking at one or two particles. If you recall the simulation from just now, you notice that not all particles tend to move towards the region of lower concentration at the very start. Nonetheless, The overall movement of all the particles shows that they are actually eventually spreading up to occupy the other regions of lower concentration. Hence, the word net is very important over here. So, as I've mentioned, because there's a concentration gradient, particles are able to diffuse. Now, the steeper the concentration gradient, the faster the rate of diffusion. Try to imagine these two scenarios, whereby there's a ball at the top of a hill. Now, do you know which of the ball will roll down faster? I guess this is pretty straightforward. If you think about it for a second, the one with the steepest slope, steepest gradient, will actually result in a faster diffusion, or rather, faster rate of the ball rolling down. Whereas the one with a more gentle or a smaller difference in terms of the concentration will have the ball rolling down slower. Now this means that the steeper the concentration gradient, the faster diffusion will be. Likewise, if you think about it in terms of a cell, we need to understand that the cell has this structure that we call a partially permeable membrane, because the partially permeable membrane, which is the plasma membrane, allows only some substances to pass through, but not others. This means that with the help of diffusion, food and oxygen can actually diffuse in, whereas any waste products or carbon dioxide that is being formed within the cell can actually diffuse out. Now this actually tells us that diffusion allows the cell to obtain whatever nutrients it needs, and at the same time removing whatever waste products that it has produced. And do remember, this entire process does not require any form of energy, because particles by themselves are able to do so through the concentration gradient from a high concentration towards a lower concentration. Likewise, if you look at the lungs, this structure is actually what I call the alveolus. It is something you'll learn eventually in the later part of the Sec 3 syllabus. So inside the lung itself, right, there's these tiny pockets called the alveolus, and what happens is that oxygen can actually diffuse in the blood vessel, and this tube over here is actually the blood vessel. Now at the same time, carbon dioxide actually diffuses out of the blood vessels, and as a result they get breathed out from the mouth whenever we inhale and exhale. So this is what you term as the gaseous exchange. In fact, in your small intestine itself, absorption of nutrients also involves diffusion. This particular structure in your small intestine is actually called the villus, okay, which you will also learn more in details in the next few chapters. What happens is that because of digestion, there will be a high concentration of nutrients in the small intestine. In the blood itself, there's actually a low concentration of nutrients. Because of this difference, what happens is that the nutrients can actually diffuse in to the blood vessels, and that's why you see this particular direction showing that the nutrients actually move in, and that's through diffusion itself. I just want to add in one more example, and you can actually copy this down onto your notes. So another example that I want to add on is this: the uptake of oxygen by red blood cells. Now, red blood cells are structures or specialized cells within your body that actually allows you to transport oxygen from the lungs to the rest of the body. Oxygen can actually diffuse in the red blood cell, and once the red blood cell reaches a place whereby the oxygen is required, oxygen can actually diffuse out. This therefore allows the red blood cell to serve as a transport mechanism to allow oxygen to be attached to it and then released whenever it's needed. So these are just some examples of how diffusion happens in the human body. Now moving on to osmosis. Now osmosis is slightly different. In terms of the definition of osmosis, what we need to understand is that now it's no longer about particles, but the key word over here is actually water. You'll still see the word net, which represents overall. So osmosis is the overall movement of water molecules from a solution of higher water potential to a region of lower water potential, and this must be through a partially permeable membrane. Now through this, you'll notice a few differences. Number one, we are looking at water molecules only for the osmosis. Number two, instead of looking at concentration, we are looking at this term called water potential. So initially it was from higher concentration towards region of lower concentration, but now we are looking at water potential. And the third difference is this term called a partially permeable membrane. Now osmosis needs a partially permeable membrane, whereas diffusion doesn't need to have. So what you see over here is actually the process of osmosis. All these tiny structures are representing your water molecules, what happens is that on the left side over here, I actually have more of the water molecules, so this is what I call a higher water potential area. On the right side, I have less of it, this is what I call a lower water potential region. As a result, osmosis happens in this manner until get this system whereby there's more or less an equal distribution of water molecules on both sides. So it's somehow similar to diffusion, but except for three main differences. What is a partially permeable membrane and how is it related to osmosis? Now, one good example is your cell surface membrane, which is your plasma membrane. Because it only allows some substances to pass through, but not others, and hence is required for the osmosis process to happen. So some of these substances will include water molecules. So let's take a look at an example of how osmosis actually happens. Now over here, I actually have a U-shaped tube. So what you see over here is that in the middle, they are actually separated by this partially permeable membrane. On this side, there's actually some structure called sucrose molecules, represented by the big circles, and there's some substances called the water molecules, represented by the small particles. If you were to count the number of small particles, you realize that in B, there's actually more water molecules. So you say this is a region of higher water potential. And therefore, A is what I call region of lower water potential. Because this process involves water molecules and there is a partially permeable membrane in the middle, osmosis can happen in this direction as represented by the arrow from B side towards the A side. And what do you end up with? You actually end up with this setup whereby the water level in B will actually fall because of how the water molecules actually move towards A. But at this time, what is interesting is to take note that while water molecules actually move from B towards A, the sucrose molecules, which is represented by the bigger circles, actually did not move at all. Now, why is that the case? Because they are too big. Remember, the term partially permeable membrane means that there's a selection whereby only some substances can pass through but not others. In this case, sucrose is too big and therefore they cannot fit through the holes within the partially permeable membrane. So I hope you more or less understand how osmosis happens. Of course, at the end, you have an equal distribution of water molecules on both sides. So what exactly is a water potential gradient? Likewise to what you learned previously about concentration, in this case, water potential is a measure of the tendency of water to move from one place to another. So when something is diluted, a diluted solution is what we say a solution with high water potential. That means it is mainly water. On the other hand, there's also a term called a concentrated solution. Concentrated solution is mainly made up of other substances. Okay, so let me give you a very classic example. You have definitely went to the bubble tea shop before and you have ordered drinks of different sugar level. Now for those of you who drink drinks with 100% sugar, this will fall under your concentrated solution because there's a lot of the sugar inside and therefore there's not a lot of water and hence is why you say it has a lower water potential. Now those of you who order 0% bubble tea, because mainly it's water that makes up the entire substance, you will have a higher water potential. Now this is one good example to remember about what does it mean to have high water potential and what does it mean to have low water potential. Just like in the previous case, once there's a difference in water potential, we have this thing called a water potential gradient. Because of the water potential gradient, water molecules are able to move from a higher water potential area towards a region of lower water potential, and this must happen through a partially permeable membrane. So let's take a look at this example and see how it applies to what we know about osmosis. Over here, I have this entire structure that's what I call a Tista funnel. Now, if you look at a Tista funnel, you realize that it has a long tube followed by a circular bottom over here. Okay, so this is how the funnel looks like. And over here, I actually put in this thing called a cellophane paper. Now, a cellophane paper over here is actually a partially permeable membrane. In this question, you'll notice that there's different solutions. There's sucrose solution inside the container or the piston funnel, and I have water surrounding it. Yeah, and I have a partially permeable membrane over here at the bottom. This means that I'm actually separating the sucrose solution from the water, and in doing so, I actually establish two different regions of water potential. So, what do you think will happen to a liquid level in this taster funnel? Think about how will osmosis happen in what direction? Should we move from the sucrose solution out into the water, from the water into the sucrose solution? Now the answer is that the water level will actually increase. Water on the outside actually has a higher water potential, and because of that, what happens is that the water molecule from this beaker will actually start to enter the funnel, and in doing so, they actually causes the water level inside to be increased because there's more and more water going in. Yeah, and the sucrose solution, the sucrose inside, they are too big and they cannot exit out. Now, so this is a net movement of water into the taster funnel through the cellophane paper by the process of osmosis. Now, if you think about it for a second, what happens if I were to reverse the contents of this entire setup? That means I put water inside now, and I fill the outside with solution. I still have my cellophane paper, which is partially permeable. Now, how do you think the water level will change in the taster funnel? Do you think this level over here, will it move up or down? Yeah, so think about this, and we'll revisit this question when we come back to class. Write down your answer and explanation on this particular slide. Okay, and with that, we have come to the end of the first video. The rest of the chapters will be reviewed when we come back to class. Now, what I need to do is to actually make sure that your notes are already completed up to this point, and to complete an online quiz on Google Form so that the teacher is aware of your difficulties or any challenges that you might have faced within this video. That's all. Thank you.